You should be telling your ghostwriter
Mm.
stories that are not in the book because it gives them context of who you are, how you handle situations, all of that. You should get vulnerable with your ghostwriter. Make sure that everything has an accurate story. So everything feels a narrative. Make sure that, like, regardless of whether the customer in the book is the character or the person telling the story is the character, there's enough of an arc there that when somebody is done reading it, they feel emotionally connected enough to share that book with somebody else, right?
Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Sean Platt. If you're in the self-publishing world, you've almost definitely heard of this guy for a really long
Sorry.
time now. You say what?
I said sorry.
For a long time now. So Sean, if you don't know him, he's written hundreds of novels, over 400 books. It's probably more than that at this point. Over 80 bestsellers. He's got acclaimed fiction titles like Yesterday's Gone and Invasion. So his fiction is done incredibly well. You may have heard him talk about it through a company that he founded. It's called Sterling and Stone. They're an IP incubator. He's also got a ghostwriting company called Invisible Ink Media, and has an in-house writing team of dozens of writers. So, I mean, today we're going to talk a lot about ghostwriting. Now, well, actually, first, welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we'll kind of tee it up this way. Like we're going to talk about all things ghostwriting today. I can't think of anyone who is more qualified to talk about this. He's ghostwritten a bunch of books himself. He's managed teams of dozens of writers. They have ghostwritten fiction, nonfiction, all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, it just runs the gamut. So if we want to learn about it, he's the guy. Now, we could also, though, spend a whole episode on fiction series, read-through rate. How do you maximize all that? And I'm probably going to hear from Rami on our team who runs the fiction side of things. He's probably going to be like, dude, you idiot.
I'm happy to come back. I'm happy.
There's too much for one episode. So yeah, we'll probably have to bring you back. Guys, if you want to hear Sean come back and talk fiction, comment on the YouTube video or let us know in the reviews on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever. And if there's enough demand, we'll bring him back. But today we're going to talk ghostwriting. So I guess first things first, Sean. I mean, there's a bajillion questions I can ask about this. I'll start from kind of the ground up. Seems like a dumb question, but what is ghostwriting? What is ghostwriting? And then I'll kind of maybe do a two-parter. Actually, let's just start there.
So ghostwriting is basically just when you're writing someone and you give them the credit in exchange for money. So it's a win-win situation for the ghostwriter because a ghostwriter, especially if they're not like ego bound or, like really it is just about creating a service or a product, then it's great because you get paid a lot more. Basically, if you're willing to shut up and take no credit, it's worth more money. And that's worth more money too to somebody who, wants to have a business book. This is especially true with business. Actually, that's not even true. It's true with fiction too. If somebody wants to put a product out there and claim credit for it and build a brand around it, then a co-author can be seriously in the way. And so it's basically hush money. It's like, hey, don't tell anybody that you had anything to do with this, and your fee is worth a lot more. And I love win-win situations, and as long as you have the right client and the client understands the relationship and the ghostwriter relationship, then yeah, it can be one of the best relationships you've had.
That's good. And we talk about this framework all the time. Depending on where you're at in your life, you've either got more time or you've got more money. You get more time than you have money, or money than you have time. And so ghostwriting is perfect for the person who wants to spend time to save money. And there's someone who's they don't have time to write a book, and they want to pay someone who does this all the time to write a great book. Now, I guess I would consider myself, Sean, like a ghostwriting skeptic. I think for years I've kind of pushed it away for a couple reasons. I mean, I think Number one, when I read something that I wrote, which I'm nowhere near as good a writer as you, but like when I read it, I'm like, was I drunk when I wrote this? Like, this sucks. Now imagine if I paid someone 50 grand to write something for me. It's just like, it feels like a hard model to have happy customers, where there's just such a high bar. But then on the flip side, a lot of times it's like that meme of like the clients, it's the horse and it's
Yeah.
the client's budget, client expectations. And it's like they got a stick figure budget, but they want a 3D image of a horse, right? So I think a lot of times people
Yes.
with ghostwriting, they'll say, okay, cool. Well, I want an incredibly quality ghostwritten book. And can you do it for like 5 or 10 grand?
Yeah.
And so then there's just almost like this juggle between they're not willing to pay what it takes to hire a great ghostwriter, but they also have high expectations. So I think for so long, and sorry for this kind of long monologue tee up to this question, but I think for so long I've just kind of pushed it away and said, hey, yeah, it'd be way faster to grow the business if we're charging 50 grand a pop, but it's harder to create happy customers. So I guess the question I would say, or that I would ask is, how does an author know if they should ghostwrite or write the book themselves? Like, what do you think is kind of the determination there at the start?
Man, there are so many ways to answer that question. So let me back up a bit and say, I think the biggest question to ask before you even start here is, why do I want a book? Because there's a spectrum of reasons for that, right? You're talking about like all the way at the top. So we do focus on the top end just because we have a lot of experience. It's more of a harpoon than a net. We're deciding who to work with and what clients we have time for. So we're automatically going to start at the top. We have a lot of relationships in Hollywood because of the IP side. So we're focused on celebrity memoirs, thought leader books, stuff like that. So if you take a celebrity memoir, their reasons are obvious and their budget is obviously large, right? They want to be seen in a different light than whatever the entertainment industry has cast upon them so far. They want to give context to their personality. A thought leader wants to build a business around their book, right? So even if they can write a book, they know that working with somebody who can tease out the best from them is worth the money, because if they get 20 grand for stepping on stage every time, then they only need to do that 5 times to pay for $100,000 book. But at that level, there's a lot that goes into that book, because you really have to your point, you have to sound like this person. So you have to absorb enough of them and like really understand their stories. And for us, we have a whole team that is pulling the story out of them, because there's a spectrum of how ghostwritten books are like compiled too. So a lot of transcription, where they're doing a lot of interviews, and then they take the transcripts and kind of piece them together. And that can work, certainly, but it comes off as a little more anecdotal, where we're really trying to find the core story that's like beginning and the middle and the end, that makes it really feel more like, not like fiction, but using all the fiction tricks and all the copywriting tricks that keep people on a page and turn. But not everybody needs that level of book. Sometimes you just need a book that is like, this is my business card, this is proof of my authority, and I'm still going to get the results. So I think you kind of have to work backwards on like, what do you want this end product to do for you? And then that determines how much you can spend on it, what you expect your ROI to be. And so, yeah, you can get a $10,000 book, working with someone on Upwork, but it's never going to be better than a very basic business card book. Like, yes, it exists and it will open these 3 or 4 more doors for me, all the way at the other end of the spectrum where, okay, now you have an international passport. You can go anywhere because you have actual book that's a perennial seller that doesn't just exist on Amazon with, phone book sales rankings, but, ticks along. People are constantly buying it and buying it, and therefore it's constantly building your business.
That's good. So it sounds like begin with the end in mind. Hey, what's the purpose of this? And what's the ROI case for this? Is it clients? What's the path? And then it sounds like, for some people, if you've got such crazy high expectations and this is like your magnum opus, your life book, it might make more sense to write it yourself, or be willing to pay a lot of money for a really good ghostwriter. Because I think that's where the clash often is it's that shoestring budget with crazy high expectations just because I don't want to do the work, right?
Yes.
And so I think that might be a little bit of a delineation, but this next question might also just roll some people out as well. So I want to go price, then process.
Okay.
So what is the price range that it costs to hire a good or to hire a ghostwriter in general? And Yeah, let's start there.
I would say if you are looking to have something that is more than just a business card book, you really are talking about $50,000 or more, because it's not about the writing. So for us, like, writing is not difficult, not to diminish what it is, but it's just not that big a deal. So in the intro, you said, I think you credited me with 400 plus books. So our publishing company has 400 books.
Right.
Written somewhere between 2 and 300, including things I've ghosted. I don't really know my number. I stopped tracking a long time ago. I just don't know. It's been at least 200. I'm sure I haven't written more than 300. But regardless, if I have a really quality outline in front of me, which, like, I do, I never write anything without an outline in it, right? And so, like, if I'm really have a good outline, nothing's going to take me longer than a month or so. And so that's not really where the money goes. The money is paid for all of this pre-production work. It's all like, it's really figuring out the story. Like, one of the last clients we worked with, they flew into town and were here for a few days, and like just getting that story. And that time is very expensive, because we only have so much time. And if we're not doing a ghosting project over here, then we're creating IP that, we'll become a movie someday. So it's really about like you want that win-win. You want it to be good for the ghostwriter, and you want it to be good for the client, because that's where there's real synergy and that's where magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point with that disconnect, that's in our experience, it is the people with the lowest budget who have the highest expectation, where
interesting. Yeah.
somebody comes to us and they're willing to spend $100,000 on this product. They're used to charging a lot for their services. So they understand what it means to be a good client, and they come to us with a lot of trust. And it also helps that we just founded the actual company, Invisible Ink, earlier this year. And for a decade before that, we just did ghosting by word of mouth. People just knew it was what we did. So everything was referral, which changes the conversation to begin with. But if you're coming into it like with those sky high expectations, that's really hard, because it's never ever going to be good. It's like there's always going to be friction from the very beginning. So I think that deciding whether you should do it yourself is like, do you have the skill set as a writer? And maybe the best path is not to have somebody else do all the work, but to pay for a coach, to have like guide you through the process. Because and it also depends on what you're writing for. Again, going back to the why. So if this is your legacy piece, right? If it's like a memoir, then maybe you should have a more active hand in it. And also acknowledge that, if you're just writing a memoir, like, your family may read it, your friends may read it, but if you're not already a celebrity or a name, your memoir is probably not going to be read by that many more people. So you don't really need the $100,000 version. You can have the coached version of your own story, because you've been telling versions of those stories all your life. Otherwise, you have enough material for a memoir. So you already have some basic foundational experience with every story that you're going to tell in the memoir. So working with a coach in that situation is a lot more economical, and honestly will probably give that memoir author more of what they're looking for, which is being in touch with their own legacy. And if they actually spend the time on the page, they're going to be more in touch with their legacy.
Got it. That makes sense. So it sounds like price range. You said, hey, if you wanted to be more than a business card, 50,000 plus, up to what, 100, 150? Like, what's kind of the high end ghostwriting?
Like, I've actually never heard a ceiling. It just depends. Like, there's people who on both sides, nonfiction and fiction, who like at the top of their game. They know how to create New York Times bestsellers, and they could charge $1 million. I know somebody who charges $300,000 for memoirs very consistently. So it depends, because if you're talking about like, this is how much it's what will the market pay, right?
Right.
If you talk about a ghostwriter who is in so demand, they can only do X number of books a year, but there's more than that number of people who actually want them to be doing the book. Well, they can charge whatever they want.
Supply and demand, yeah, for sure. And then the
But I would
low
say
end, like on the business
up is where the high end starts. Yeah.
That makes sense. And then low end on the like, okay, I care about quality, but it doesn't need to be an incredible book. It just needs to be a very solid business card. What's like the absolute lowest that somebody can get that done for?
Okay, this is a harder question, but I'm going to say the real differentiator is how much time are you willing to invest to find the right person? Because there are like, I'll take myself as a good example. The first book I ever ghost wrote was $5,000. This was 15 years ago, right? But I wrote a book for $5,000. I still check in on that book every once in a while, it still sells. It's still a good seller. Like it is a perennial seller.
Wow.
I'm a gifted writer. I know what to do, and I knew
Yeah.
what to do it really early. But a long time ago, 15 years ago, there's no way I could have charged $100,000 for a book. People would have laughed in my face. Like, what do you think, Ray Romano looking asshole? There's no way you could. And so like there's just no universe where I could have done that, right? But back then, and not only that, but the book that would take me a month now, and I could charge that, back then it would have taken me 3 months, right? So it's just a totally different scale. But if somebody took the work to find me back then, right? They read my blog, they're like, maybe they can do this. And so you can find quality people on Upwork. You can find a writer who's worth, $100,000 and pay them 10, but it's hard. It's a lot of time. So if you want to go that route, the best thing I could suggest is come up with like basically what you want your first chapter to look like and hire 10 writers to write chapter 1. And then use that person to
interesting.
the whole rest of the book.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can find cheap. It's a crapshoot. You can pull the arm at the slot machine all day, and occasionally it jingles, but you're going to spend a lot of time and money to get there.
It's a great analogy, and I mean, you think in some ways it defeats the purpose of hiring a ghostwriter, because if you're spending all this time, now you're spending time to save money, which is the antithesis of hiring. You could actually just be working on your mind map, your outline, going through the process, actually writing the book. But it's a natural trap to fall into, right? I'll put myself in that bucket. Obviously, my time is worth a very large amount, and when I do that calculation every time, it shocks me. But also, I came from like a blue collar family where my parents met working night shift at a factory, and so we clipped coupons and all this stuff. So I'm always searching for the deal, right? So it's hard not to fall into that trap of, okay, let me just find the cheapest, best ghostwriter and go down that path. But then that's a good reminder that, hey, maybe that's just a futile pursuit because you're wasting the thing that you tried to save in the beginning or in the first place, which is time.
Absolutely. I would add though that's where word of mouth really, really helps. So if that 10,000 person, like somebody gives you a referral for them, like that's huge, right? They're saying, hey, I vetted this person. They did the job. It was great. It's worth every penny of $10,000. Then you feel, oh, that's awesome, right? But if you have to hire 10 people on Upwork and vet each one of those and have all those 10 conversations, well, how much did you actually just spend in your growth capital?
Right. That's smart. So I guess a follow-up question on that is how to find a good ghostwriter. And it sounds like from what you kind of already said, referrals, but any other tips for folks who are looking for ghostwriters, how to find a good one, and how do you even know if they're good?
Yeah, so I think that referrals are great, and the way you can frame that is because a lot of people, again, they're paying for discretion, right? So that's hard on both sides. Like for us, our biggest, most successful titles, we can't say anything about them. We have NDAs, like they're there, right? And for the person looking, like, how do you find out whose book was ghostwritten, right? But if you have somebody who has a great book, for example, and it looks like maybe pick 10 people like this out there who have like really high quality business books where you can think, well, you're not an author first, so possibly you had help with this, even if it was just a coach, and reach out to them and say, I really admire your book. Like your book is really meaningful. I'm looking to do a book like that myself. Would you have any suggestions on places to point me for coaching or ghostwriting or anything like that? You're not accusing the person of being a ghostwriter. You're saying, this is a really great book. I want to achieve that level and I would like some help. And that's a great way to like get some of those referrals because, and you'll probably get a spectrum back and then shop accordingly to your budget.
Cool. That's great. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. And so let's talk about the process now and the process of what it looks like to work with a ghostwriter, how long it takes, all that stuff. And I guess I'll give the context here. I forgot to mention this at the top. So Sean is working with us at selfpublishing.com behind the scenes with our team to kind of start to build out our framework to offer ghostwriting in the future. So this is something we've been incubating for months now. And just we want to make sure that we do it right and not just roll out a slap together crappy solution. And so I think the thing that, and I know you've already been talking with the team about this, is quality at scale, profitably, right? It's almost like this Venn diagram of like, and so that's where my mind just keeps going, is like, okay, how do we predictably produce quality books at scale, which I feel like is probably maybe the hard part, because so many ghostwriter kind of services or companies or whatever are pretty mom and pop, but also doing it profitably. So that's like kind of the riddle that we're trying to solve. But I guess in the lens of the customer, or in the lens of I would say author, but I guess they're the author, not the writer.
Yeah.
What's the process look like, and how long does it typically take to work with a ghostwriter?
Yeah, well, first, just a compliment to your team, because whatever you're drilling into them, like, it's always been about satisfied customers and over delivering. And that's great. And a lot of the conversations that we've had around scale are like, well, you kind of have to charge more. Like, you can't have, and this all started, for those folks at home, this all started because Chandler wanted to offer ghosting. It just makes sense. It makes sense with the company. Like, there's unlimited leads. People will always want to write books. Books will never, ever stop being an authority piece, ever. And it makes sense to want to answer that need, but like you said at the top of the call, well, I'm a bit of a ghostwriting skeptic, right? It was both as a consumer and as fulfillment, right? And that was the question when we first had dinner. That was the question. It was like, how do I do a quality job of this? And I saw the conflict. Like, I saw the conflict in you, where you're like, I want to really over deliver and have something that people are really, really proud of, but I also don't want to charge a lot. And that's probably your blue collar parents. Same with me, dude. Same with me. We had a family business and we were always scrapping by. And like, I totally get that. And I've had the same conflict my entire time in business. So one of the things that had us, basically price out at the top is because it's limited. We can't grow so much. Like, it's not our only business. It's a very curated part of our business. So it only made sense to focus on the top. And also because I'm in a lot of masterminds, like, that's my network. Like, I know people who want the books. So it made sense. And for you, I was looking at the problem more like, so growing up, we had a flower shop, and my father and I had kind of a falling out around, this is actually why I left the business, is because a Trader Joe's moved in right next to us. And this was like, we opened the store in 1980. And in 1980, like, you didn't buy flowers at grocery stores. That wasn't a thing. And we were the first business in all of Long Beach that did this. My dad would go to the flower market, and my dad dropped out of high school like I did. Like, we're generationally fucked up, I guess. But like, we're very, very entrepreneurial. And the only reason we ever had a flower shop was because he saw an empty flower shop, him and my mom, when they were out to dinner, and the cooler was there, but the people had lost their lease. And they're like, we could figure this out. They didn't know anything about the flower business. Same as like me. I didn't know anything about the publishing business when I started, which is why I rocked it so hard, because I didn't have to unlearn shit, right? Ooh, yeah. So they had this flower shop, and I lost my train of thought, dude. Pricing. Yeah. So he would go to the flower market and buy just a bunch of flowers and only mark it up a tiny bit for the bundles. So instead of arrangements, it was people buying flowers for themselves. And our whole entire identity was inexpensive flowers for yourselves. Well, that's what Trader Joe's came in and right? And Trader Joe's could sell stuff for less than it cost us wholesale, because they actually just wanted people to buy the wine. So my dad constantly wanted to compete on price. And I'm like, dude, we'll never, ever win that. Like, we already lost. There's no way we can win that war. So let's go the opposite way and become Long Beach's most prestigious design shop. And it was just as much of an idea clash as you could get. and the business went out of business 3 years later. Like
Makes sense.
it
Yeah.
happened. And ever since then, I've had that conflict still because I do hedge on charging on price. But once we had to really anchor it in the ghosting space, we wanted that. And when you're like trying to find this perfect thing for self-publishing.com that is like the highest price, that, or I guess the lowest price that allows you to scale and protects everybody. It protects the clients and it protects the end product. I think you're handling it really well. And that does come down to process. And so that just basically means, what are the guarantees that we can make around this? So like, make sure that everything has an accurate story. So everything feels a narrative. Make sure that, like, regardless of whether the customer in the book is the character or the person telling the story is the character, there's enough of an arc there that when somebody is done reading it, they feel emotionally connected enough to share that book with somebody else, right? Like, there are things that you can do to make the product better and then filter for your customer and just say, like, look, we're really sorry if this price is too high for a ghostwriting or a ghostwritten book, but good news, we have coaches available and we have these other programs available.
Yeah.
So I think that seeing ghosting as something that's for everybody is the mistake if you're trying to scale. You're always going to have enough customers to scale at the product that you build. Like, you just will. Like, there's always these people who need books. So the focus that we've had when talking about process is how to make the best promise possible that, to your point, is always going to have happy customers that feel like self-publishing over-delivered for them.
Cool. That's great. So let's look at the process as a whole. And I want to say just, hey, whether the people are working with us or working with a ghostwriter in general, what do you believe is the ideal process? And so let's imagine, like, hey, we've got a whiteboard here. We're doing boxes. There's, let's call it 5 steps, maybe 7 or whatever. What are the key things that need to happen for a ghostwriter and a client to work together successfully to create a great book?
Okay, so that's a great question. So you guys have a few more steps in the process than we do, and we're figuring that out right now to like iron that out, like what is, because we're a little more minimalist, but then our buckets take longer. So we have 3 essential buckets, and this has worked really well for us. It's basically pre-production and discovery, and in that time, it's a lot of interviews, it's a lot of questions, it's a lot of getting to know the person. And for us, in this part, we often actually find that the author has a different book in mind than what we actually end up with. So they come with a preconceived idea of, oh, here's the story I want to tell. Here's what I think we needed to do. And we're like, wait, for the brand that you're actually trying to build, for the message that you're actually trying to convey, have you thought about this story? And that's where it's really important to have, like, and this is another thing that makes the price worth it. So a basic ghostwriter who can get your story told is different than a team who is coming up with the best possible title, the best possible log line and hook, some of the marketing and conversion elements that are going to make it a perennial seller over time. So we spend a lot of like the first phase doing that. Then the second phase is getting all of that into a usable outline. Like, we had 1,000 pages of transcripts recently to go over. Like, okay, now we have to take all of this discovery and turn it into an outline. And that's where some of our fiction chops come in, because we don't always go like beginning end and our stuff isn't really prescriptive. And then the third phase is writing. But each of those, like, so the commitment on the client's part reduces over time. So up front, it's a lot. Like most of our clients, we have weekly meetings until we don't need them anymore. And then when we're in phase 2, they have to respond to the outlines and like fill out questions and like, oh, I don't like this. Oh, no, I know I told you that story, but I don't want it in the book. You get a lot of that, right? Oh, you know what? Can we please change so-and-so's name to so-and-so? And then once you have an outline that's really clear, then it goes into phase 3, which is actually writing it. But then even after that, there's, you want to send it back to them and make sure that it's there. And going to the actual, like, how do you scale this? That's a lot of the questions that we're asking right now. Like, how many times does a client get to pass it back? Because you can't scale something if a client can send it back 7 times. Like, it's not reasonable. And also, that's just the client not trusting the process, because there's no way that if you guys are that dialed in, and and for everyone listening, dude, the team is dialed in. They all come from trad publishing. They all have like excellent vocabulary around every single part of this process. So it's really like, how do we get the process in a way where the client trusts us? And it is hard. There is a disconnect. And this goes all the way back to the things you were saying at the very beginning about like these sky high expectations and like, the stick figure budget. And you see that over and over again, where the person with the stick figure budget is the person who has the most opinions on every part of the process and will send it back 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
Because they want to get their money's worth. They feel like they're not getting their money's worth unless they're really pushing back. And also, they don't really understand enough about the craft or the process or the end product. It's just about how it emotionally makes them feel. And that's another reason that, the filter is good, because like $50,000, you're going to get clients who can see, okay, if I spend $50,000 on this, I'm going to get at least $100,000 back. And I'm going to trust the experts to create that product and experience for me instead of second guessing everything that they do.
That's good. I like that overview. So it sounds like the process that you guys do is pre-production and discovery. That's the most time intensive part on the author. So there's interviews, they're pulling kind of all this stuff out. Then moving into bucket 2, which is creating the usable outline. So that's kind of sifting and distilling. And as we both know, the better the outline, the better the book, and the faster
Always.
the book. And then
Yes.
bucket 3, writing the book. And so this is kind of like, I would say it fits-ish into, so we've got our 8 milestones, which if people are watching on the YouTube channel, you can see this, or if you just pull up my book, it's called Published on Amazon, the image is right there on the page. But there's 8 milestones to go from blank page to published. The first 4 is what we call the more writing method. So it's mind map, outline, rough draft, and editing, and kind of pretty closely mirrors. And it's oftentimes whether people are writing the book themselves or working with a ghostwriter. We've obviously got a lot more experience coaching people through the writing themselves, about thousands of books published that way. But we see that if they skip that step, which is very tempting, hey, I'll just skip this and start writing, then they end up meandering and the book isn't as good. So it's fun to see those kind of crossovers. I want to ask a couple final follow-up questions, and we're running out of time. So I'll kind of lightning round. But in that process that you just listed, what's the hardest part? And what do authors or people who are hiring a ghostwriter, like what do they need to be aware of and to kind of grease the wheels of the hardest parts of the process?
I think the hardest part is being open. Like as an author, be open to the experience, be open to being vulnerable. And like, so I just made a joke, about like, oh, I told you that story, but I don't want it in a book. That's actually not a joke. That should be a part of every book. You should be telling your ghostwriter stories that are not in the book, because it gives them context of who you are, how you handle situations, all of that. You should get vulnerable with your ghostwriter. You should not treat them as an employee. You should treat them as a collaborator in this project. Because if you open yourself to that relationship, then the hard parts aren't really hard, because you really develop this rapport where it's all about candor and manners. Anything can be said as long as it's said, appropriately. And that allows the ghostwriter to ask some very hard questions, because if we're able to ask the more difficult questions, then we get a better product. But if we have that like client, provider relationship, it's different. It's like, well, I don't want to upset the client. I don't want to ask that. And that's not great for anybody. You really want to have rapport.
Cool. That's great. And then I guess, couple part question. So we got one question from a listener. Sarah says, how do you deal with the emotional aspect of not being publicly recognized for your work, especially when a book that you ghost wrote becomes highly successful?
Honestly, you guys, I just don't care. So I'm super, super collaborative. It's my nature. So I never, like, I wanted to become a ghostwriter originally because I needed to save my house. Like that was it. So like, I was getting paid, this is 15 years ago, I was getting paid a penny a word for SEO articles. And so I'm like, how do I make $1 a word? Well, there's 2 ways, copywriting or ghostwriting. That's it, right? So I got really good at both of those things. And then as I built a story studio, like we do a lot of fiction publishing, and that requires, I used to just want to write everything under my name because hell, that's a story I told. But like, okay, here's this like vampire story and here's this like detective story. And readers aren't like that. Readers are very genre specific. So over time, we had to come up with a bunch of pen names. I'm not getting credit for it anyway. Like, and then I'm working with this author and like, I just don't, maybe it's because I have 200 plus books. Like I get credit for plenty. I don't need credit for all. And a lot of times there's actually a lot of joy. So very recently, a project that we had to do, like, or got to do, I didn't get any credit for it. It was a very, very successful book. But if I had got credit for it, it would have been a subtraction for the author and for the project. And like, all I want is for the author to get everything and more. Like, just like you, dude, you're like, I just want like customers that are beyond thrilled. That's how I feel. And whether, you know, like a lot of the stuff I don't get credit for isn't even client work. It's just people I'm collaborating with. But then this project becomes something really cool. That's all I need. I need the success from the project, not the credit.
That's a great way to go about it. Well, guys, if you want your questions answered on a future episode, leave a comment on this video on the YouTube channel, or leave it in a review on the podcast. Couple final things as we wrap. One, we're real soon, we will be opening up the beta and accepting our first 5 authors for ghostwriting with us. So if you want to be considered as one of those first 5 authors, book a call with the team at selfpublishing.com/talk, and we'll see if it makes sense. We'll see if it's a fit. So selfpublishing.com/talk, book a call with the team. We'll cap it at 5 to start. We're going to get things going, and then we'll obviously scale it from there. But if you're early on in the process, you get the most hand-holding, the most help, all that, because we want to make sure that you're a raving fan at the end of that process. So if that's you, let us know, book a call with the team. And then for you, Sean, what would be your parting piece of advice, knowing what you know now, kind of being a ghostwriter, doing it a bunch of times, managing ghostwriters, like you've just got such a unique look from being on all sides of the table. What would be your parting piece of advice for someone who's thinking about working with a ghostwriter for their book?
Definitely know your why. I think that's the most important thing. Know what you want to accomplish. Ask yourself the question, hey, this book published, it's a year after it's published, and I'm holding a party and everyone's toasting to the success of this book. What are we actually toasting? That's a really good question to ask because it gives you direction. And also don't do it before you're ready. Like if you know you need a book, great. Build a business enough to justify getting the book. Instead of like, okay, a book's gonna cost me $50,000. I'm gonna look for the $20,000 version. Dude, don't do that. Make $30,000 extra this year by focusing on your business and get the book next year.
Love it. Sean, where can people go to find out more about you, your business, your books? Where's the best place for people to go?
Well, these days I've been hanging out on LinkedIn for some weird reason. Like I just started a couple of months ago. I'm there every day, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Other than that, my two babies, other than my real babies in real life, are sterlingandstone.net and invisibleinc.media.
Cool. Guys, give it up for Sean. Just such a legend. I was telling him right before this, a beacon of positivity. It's infectious. And we've had a lot of fun just getting to do some work behind the scenes with him, and a lot of big things ahead. So Sean, you're the man. Thank you.
Adios.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.